First off, lots of optics, lots of posturing leading up to this meeting today. For you, how does a successful trade deal look like? What must be there for you?
Well, we have to think about it in two contexts. One, the economic context, and two, the national security context. And of course, technology is in both of those. So for me, ultimately, we have to maintain substantial tariffs because we have a very unbalanced relationship. We are transferring enormous amounts of wealth overseas, but specifically to China, directly and through countries that they transship through. So we need substantial tariffs to get that back in the direction of balance, and then we have to think about the national security, the technology side of it. We have to make sure we're not making concessions that are going to hurt us in the long run. The president has to deal with the choke point issues, and the general secretary and the president both have their own choke point issues, so they have to deal with that. They have to make sure we are in a position where those choke points don't bring either of our economies to a halt in whatever term this agreement is. So those are the principal issues, the way I look at it.
You talk
and then,
about
of course, fentanyl, if the president brings up fentanyl.
You talk about national security. And the president has talked about negotiating Blackwell chips. Should Blackwell chips be on the table as he negotiates this trade deal? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to, second guess the president on that. We clearly don't want to transfer more technology to China than we have to, any more than they want to transfer any of their technology and their choke points to us. So it's going to be a balance. The president presumably will do what he has to do. But as a general matter, we have to realize that China is an adversary of the United States, and that we have to be careful what we transfer to them.
If there are concessions to do with Blackwell chips, does it essentially mean the end of export controls?
No, I don't believe that's true. I think export controls will maintain an essential part of U.S. Policy for a long period of time. They've been there for decades and decades and decades, and I think they will be there in the future. And I would say most other countries have export controls. China, for sure, has a whole system of them. So I think the question is going to be just what the terms are.
Lots of issues on the table: fentanyl, soybeans, Blackwell chips. What's key for you?
Well, to me, the most important thing is to maintain the tariffs and not give up technology in a way that will have an adverse national security advantage.
What is the U.S. getting out of it right now?
Well, I mean, I think we have to remember that these choke points that China had were quite significant, and I think there was probably a surprise by some in the U.S. economy just how strong they were and how willing to use them China was. So I think we have to get beyond the choke points, and we have the equal ones that we could use on China. And then, of course, the president emphasizes fentanyl. The reality is that we lose about 100,000 people a year to fentanyl, and almost all of that is coming from China. And the general secretary could, if he wanted to, stop that. And I hope that's part of the deal. I hope that they do not just make an effort. China can stop the flow of fentanyl if it wants to. They don't have fentanyl problems in China, so they can stop it if they want to. So I think the way to think about it is we need an agreement that maintains security, leads to rebalance, and realize that this is only going to be something that's going to last for a period of months or perhaps a year or so, and then we're going to be back there and have to look at it again.
I asked because President Trump celebrated the fact that China is buying U.S. soybeans again, but China has always been buying soybeans, and the amount has been minimal compared to what it's bought before. So how much really is the U.S. getting out of it that it is a win for the U.S.?
Well, I mean, soybeans are an important part. They're an important product to our agricultural sector. They are about half of total U.S. exports. So it's important that we have China buy the soybeans. I don't think it measures up to the rebalancing or to the national security issues, but it's very important, particularly to that sector. And China has promised to buy them in the past, and sometimes they kept their promise, sometimes they didn't. So hopefully that'll be part of the deal. But to me, it's not as fundamental as some of these other things. It's important politically, but it's not necessarily as important as the tariffs and the national security issues are. But I understand what the president's trying to do here. What's
also key for the U.S. has been the trade imbalance. But the question really is, how do you address that trade imbalance if there are curbs on U.S. investments, Chinese investments in the U.S.?
Well. I mean, I don't think the two are particularly related, right? We ought to have balanced trade with the world. We for sure should have balanced trade with China. They are a geopolitical adversary, and we shouldn't be in a position where we're sending them $200, $300, $400 billion a year in trade surplus and in technology. So, and in terms of investment, it's a question of the kind of investment you want from China. You don't want China investing in your technology because it's not secure. So I don't think the two are related. I think you can for sure get trade under control without having China invest in the United States.
Should President Trump ease those restrictions on Chinese investments?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, I hope that he does not do that. As I say, I'm not against all investment by China in the United States, but I certainly am in the kind of things they want to invest in. China is making a decision when they invest. They want to invest in technology and they want to get data. And those are two things we shouldn't be sharing with them. We shouldn't be sharing data with them because it educates AI, and we should not be sharing technology. So I hope he does not ease those, or at least doesn't. And I'm comfortable that he won't ease them in a way that's a threat to the United States. The president is very, very knowledgeable about this thing.
So in which areas should Chinese investments be okay, be accepted, be...
Well, in the first place, I wouldn't encourage it at all. But in the second place, if you said, low-tech kinds of manufacturing and the like, then it's conceivable. But it would have to be something where there was low-tech and low data. So I don't think we want to encourage it particularly at all. And by the way, there's no reciprocity at all there. China only lets us invest in things that they think is in China's interest. They don't let us go in there and invest in their technology and the like.
There has been suggestions of a sovereign wealth fund in the U.S. Are you for it? And the number out there has been about $1 trillion.
Well, I've heard that, and I always had this sort of view that if you have a $35 trillion deficit or national debt, it's hard to have a sovereign wealth fund. It seems to me the sovereign wealth fund ought to be after you pay off some of your debt. So it never made much sense to me. It is logical to say that businesses that benefit from U.S. subsidies and from U.S. technology, government technology, should pay something back to the government, to the people. So, and that's something the president believes, and I agree with him on. But the notion that we would have this giant sovereign wealth fund, I'm inclined to think we ought to pay off our debts before we worry about something like that.
Before we let you go, just one final question. Given developments that we're seeing right now in global trade, is a decoupling between the U.S. and China inevitable in the end?
Well, I don't think you're going to see decoupling. I think you're going to see strategic decoupling. You're going to see, hopefully, a relationship which is balanced, one in which security technology is independent, and in which investment going to and from is in the interest for us of the United States. That very much is the Chinese policy towards the West. They want to use trade to get big surpluses. In their case, they maintain their technology and want future technology to be totally independent of the West, and they control ingoing and outgoing investment. So I think we ought to have a policy of strategic decoupling. China clearly is implementing one, and I think we're going to end up having it.